We are starting a new series about work, the eternal value of work. I was reminded this week of a fellow who had been an executive all his life. And late in life, the company downsized and reorganized, and he lost his job. And he was trying to figure out, trying to find another job in the executive world. But at his age, it was highly unlikely he was going to get one. And then it came to a point where he just needed to get a job that brought in something. And so he was going all kinds of places, finally went to a local zoo in their small city, went to the HR, and the lady said, well, we're not hiring right now. But when he got up to leave, she noticed that he was a large man. And she said, wait a second, come sit down. She said, now you might not be interested in this, but 2 weeks ago, our gorilla died. And our gorilla is the most popular exhibit in the zoo. And if you wouldn't mind, I would hire you on the spot if you would impersonate a gorilla until we can get a new one, which is going to be about 3 months. And he thought, okay. So they gave him his gorilla suit, and he went in day 1, day 2, and it was just extremely boring. He did the things that he knew gorillas do. He ate bananas, too many bananas. He tapped the top of his head, he scratched his ribs, he made some strange sounds. And after about day 3, he was just going nuts. And so he went on Google and did, I think he Googled gorilla tricks and found all kinds of things that he could do as a gorilla. And this sort of went viral in their little city. And people were coming to the zoo to see the gorilla exhibit and all the things that he did. The zoo was setting records as far as ticket sales. And so there he was doing all these tricks, much to the delight of kids and parents. Well, one of the things as he did this, he would get on the rope and swing, from the tree. And over time, he moved the rope up higher and higher, and he was getting stronger doing this. And at one point, he swung across, and he would go up over the wrought iron fence that separated the gorilla cage from the lion cage. And he could swing up over the lines, and all the kids would go, ah, mothers, ah. Well, one day, when he went way up over the wrought iron fence, the branch where the rope was attached broke. And he went flying over the fence into the lion den. And everybody's like, oh. You could see across the way the lion was lying down, got up, and put its face down like this, and began to crouch its way across, looking at the gorilla. And the man was terrified and thought, if I yell out, help, help, I'll lose my job. And if I don't yell out, help, help, I'll lose my life. The lion was getting closer and closer. The kids and the parents were wondering what was going to happen. And finally, he couldn't stand anymore. He said, help, help. To which the lion said, shut up, you idiot. You want us both to get fired? Oh, yes, the things we do at work. When I think about work, I think about 3 general responses. One is there are some people that they love their job, and usually that's because they get to use their talents and their skills or their passion. Their work seems to make a difference to them. That's sort of group 1. My dad was in this for his first 25 years. The second group is, I'm glad to have a job because I get a paycheck. And the paycheck allows us to pay our bills and to have a little bit of extra money to do stuff we like to do. The third group is, I can't wait till Friday. I hate my job. I wish I could find something else. This is where my grandfather lived for all of his work years. My grandfather made it through 3.5 years of college and got married and decided to drop out so he could get a job and support my grandmother and him. And he worked at the post office, a work that he hated every day. He hated going to work. My father was the other end of the spectrum, where he was the king at work. He was well-known, very popular, very successful. Everybody loved him, and he started out at the very bottom of the ladder and ended up president of U.S. Life before he retired. Now, the strange thing about these 3 different positions, either I love my job, or my job's okay, but I get a nice paycheck, or I hate my job. is that all three of these things can be built on a foundation of sand. What happens to a person over here where you love your job and you get to use your skills and talents and you're making a difference? What happens if you get laid off and you take a job where you don't get to use your skills and talents and it doesn't seem like you get to make a difference? How you think about work is going to do a titanic shift. What happens if you are in the middle group, the paycheck, and suddenly you get laid off, like the zoo guy, and have to just take something? How do you think about work then? Or if you're like my grandfather, who hated his job every day. Why did he hate his job? Well, the Bible offers us a very different foundation from sand for how we think about our work. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Work, from God's point of view, is sacred. Unless you do something that is clearly immoral in your work world, what you do for work when you go in tomorrow, from God's point of view, is sacred. That was pretty cool this morning. Marion was in the kitchen, and she was getting sort of how do you do the coffee ministry thing from Lisa. And when I went in there to get one of my cups of coffee this morning, I said, wow, you two are illustrating today's sermon. And they said, really? I said, yes. Work is sacred. Making coffee, lemonade, putting out those donuts is sacred work. I wonder how often we think about that. Or how do you think about work when you go? Well, there are three ways that I'd like to highlight how work is sacred. Number one, God is a worker. God is a worker. Oftentimes when we as Christians think about work, we think that work was probably invented by God as punishment after Adam and Eve sinned. But that's not the case. Work was given to people before Adam and Eve sinned. In Genesis 2, not chapter 3, where Adam and Eve sinned, but in 2, the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. Work is sacred. God is a worker, and he gave work to Adam and Eve to do. Where did work originate? Did it originate there with Adam in chapter 2 and Eve in the Garden of Eden? No, work originated before that. In Genesis 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And all of Genesis 1 goes into some detail about how God was working through creation, day 1 through 6, working, and punctuates the end of the sentence with an exclamation mark when it says, on the seventh day he rested from his work. Work is sacred. God himself is a worker. But that isn't just happened long ago. Jesus was asked about this, John 5:16, because Jesus was doing these things on the Sabbath, the Jews persecuted him. Jesus said to them, my Father is always at his work to this very day. Not just a worker back in creation, but working every day. And I too am working, Jesus said. Work is sacred, number one, because God is a worker. Number two, we've been given a divine mandate. This is what theologians call this, the divine mandate. And it comes from Genesis 1:26. God said, let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule. And this is the beginning of the mandate. Let them rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, the livestock, over all the earth, and over all creatures that move along the ground. Now, in our current culture, when people hear this about man is supposed to take care of the world and he's given stewardship to us, probably most people, I would guess, in our culture think, oh, this is kind of the save the planet verse. We do have a stewardship over what God has given us, but saving the planet is really not the point of this particular verse here. The point is rather several different things. Number one is that this is a gift. What we've been given is a gift. And that gift is to be utilized for people's benefit. That's the main point. Also, this gift that we've been given of creation provides the platform on which God makes himself known to people. And number four, it provides an opportunity for our sustenance, and to carry out God's purposes as his people. A gift for our benefit, but also a mandate to rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, the livestock, etc. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means several different things. You might think, well, it means to tame creation. And maybe we're to tame lions and grizzly bears. Well, okay. But if you've ever had a 2-year-old who's going through the terrible twos, you know what taming is. If you have one of those teenagers that's going through a rough patch and doesn't like you being mom or dad, you know what taming is. Taming. Creating order out of chaos is another way this happens. If you clean houses, or if you're a janitor at a school, you are doing the divine mandate when you go into work tomorrow. If you're a good organizer and a good delegator that allows other people to create some order out of chaos, you are a part of the divine mandate when you go into work tomorrow. If you are a part of sustaining life, if you're a farmer, a gardener, if you're a trucker that gets food to market, if you work in a grocery store, if you put the food out there for people like us to go buy it, you are a part of the divine mandate. Your work is sacred. If your job is to make this a better place when you go to work tomorrow by planning or leading or evaluating, coordinating, communicating, financial services, industry, you are a part of the divine mandate when you go into work tomorrow. And if your job is to help make people better and their life better, if you're a plumber, if you're a carpenter, if you're a repairman, if you're a doctor, if you're a dentist, your work fulfills this divine mandate. Your work is sacred. Oh, work is sacred because God is a worker, and number 2, because of the divine mandate. And the third reason I want to mention this morning is because God is our boss. God is our boss. Now, there is something that I found on my phone this morning. And you know, when you're an employee and you work for a boss and you have one of those jobs that it's just mindless and you just hate, aren't you tempted to sort of waste some time when the boss is not around? Now, if you are, I have something for you. It's called the panic button. It says, quickly hide time-wasting tabs from your boss. Quickly hide the useless sites you're looking at so your boss doesn't know that you're slacking off. It's called the panic button, and it works on Google Chrome. Here's a tool that lets you avoid doing work more effectively. It won't protect you every time, but it might help. Let's imagine you're wasting time. We've already established that fact by the act that you're reading this article. You are wasting time. So there's really no need to imagine this, but let's imagine anyway. You've got your favorite time-wasting sites open and are about to search for the best videos Earth has to offer. And suddenly, your boss walks in. Panic. If only there was some kind of button. And oh, yes, there is. The panic button. And it's got this little yellow icon that's on your desktop, and you can just click on that little thing. Click it, and all of your time-wasting tabs will disappear. In their place is a blank page or the work-related URL of your choice. Simple. Don't worry, though. Your precious kitten videos are not gone. Autumn. That would be terrible. That would be terrible. No, your beloved distractions are merely hidden. Click the panic button again, and they will return to you just as adorable as ever. God is your ultimate boss. Colossians 3 says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for men. Now, I love the first part of this verse. Whatever you do, again, as long as you're not involved in immoral work, whatever you do is sacred. Say, what about the guys that wash cars, where you take your car and they vacuum it out and wash it? And the guys that have those towels that are drying off, all of that, from God's point of view, is sacred. What about the guys that do the smog check? Whatever you do. What about the guys that rotate the tires on your car? Paul says, whatever you do, work as unto the Lord and not for men. He continues, verse 24, since you know you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. If you look at your job as just kind of a punch in, 8:30 to 5:30, and you just kind of go in and you leave, that's not how God looks at your job. You may look at it that way, but that's not how God looks at it. If you look at it that way, how you think about your job is sitting on sand and not on concrete. Galatians 1:10, am I now trying to win the approval of men? If I were still trying to win the approval of men, I should not be a servant of Christ. Now, there's one sense in which we all need to please our boss. That's important. But there's another sense in which if I'm going to work in order to try to win my boss's approval, I'm setting myself up for some big disappointments. Even the best bosses can't give you enough thanks. A lot of bosses just think, well, I give you my thanks when you get an increase in your salary. You just kind of go, oh, okay. You just go in and put in your time, not going to get much from your boss in terms of relationship. Perhaps part of how I think about my job is sitting on sand here. God is my boss, and God is your boss. When you go in tomorrow, God is your boss. You work for him. Work is sacred. Now, there's one last thing I want to say. That does not mean that work is easy. The last thing, work is hard, and work is meant to be hard. Work is meant to be hard. I think sometimes, a lot of times, work is harder than we make work harder than it used to be because of our expectation. Right now, in our particular culture, kids come out of high school and college, and they just assume that they're on the path to their dream job, where they're going to get their skills and they're going to make a difference in this world. They're going to like going to work. They're going to form great relationships at work. Now, if that happens, fine, that's good. But there are a lot of times where that's certainly not reality. Our expectations of how we think about work can also be built on sand and not on concrete. Now, I remember when I was in college, I had, between years, I was home in Houston, in very, very hot and very, very humid Houston. And one particular summer, I had a job. It was Monday to Friday. I went into work, but then I was also looking to make some extra money. And I was getting odd jobs anywhere I could find them. And my dad lined up, one of his friends who was an executive, wanted to redo all of the insulation in the attic of his house in Houston. Now, Houston, as I've told some of you, in my opinion, is the last weather stop before hell. If you've never had a question that you might be in hell, I suggest you go to Houston in the summer and walk out the door 10 minutes tops. And you should think it could be worse than this. So I took the job. I went to this guy's house, and it was air conditioned inside. I popped up the little door up into the attic, and I put my head up. It was like I just walked into a sauna. It was about 100 degrees outside. The humidity was 95%, which is normal in Houston during the summer. I put my head up there, and I think I had a rake, and I was trying to rake out all this old insulation. And there's no telling what kind of damage I did to my lungs, with all that stuff, but I'm still here, at least so far. I could be up there for about 10 minutes at a time, and then I was about to pass out. I was just ready to get the heck out of there. And I would go downstairs, and thankfully, this couple in their kitchen had a side-by-side refrigerator freezer. And I would walk over to that side-by-side refrigerator freezer and just open both doors and just go, Just feel that cold air coming in, and close the doors and back up into the attic. And it took me several days to get all the old insulation out of the top of the attic. And then thankfully, they had invented roll insulation. So now I'm just going up the ladder with these big rolls of insulation and roll them out between all the rafters. It had to be at least 120 degrees up there, at least. And during that time, the first day I went, because it was Houston, I went and did this, the extrication of insulation, in flip-flops, gym shorts, and a tank top. Now, I thought that was a good idea until I got up with all that loose insulation. I had this stuff all over me. And you're sweating, and it just kind of sticks to you. And it was just awful. And so the next day, even though I hate heat, I wore jeans and a long-sleeve shirt and was miserable. And you know what? Speaking of jeans, last night I was the sheriff at Fall Festival. I'm always a sheriff. And I learned something. I'll bet you that the Old West sheriffs did not wear skinny jeans. I learned a lesson. And also learned another lesson. I don't believe that they wore ski boots instead of cowboy boots. I think I've got a few more things to do for my costume. Where was I? Oh, up in the attic with jeans. That was a hard job. Very, very difficult. What did I expect? I expected it to be a hard job. That helped me. Genesis 3, to Adam he said, because you listened to your wife, ate from the tree about which I commanded you, you must not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil, you will eat of it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you. You will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow, you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you will return. Now, the Hebrew word for painful toil is itzabound, which sort of, even in English, that sounds like a bad thing. Itzabound. And it means toil or sorrow or something that's worrisome, something you just don't want to be a part of. And what he's saying here is don't be surprised if you experience this kind of pain when you go to work. Now, sometimes it's physical pain, like it was up in that attic with your job. Sometimes it's emotional pain. If you're in a job that has high stress, high demands, if you're in sales, you have to meet certain quotas and deadlines. Sometimes it's not physical pain, but emotional pain. And sometimes it's relational pain. I mean, my hat's off to people who work customer service. I don't know how you would do that job all day dealing with the public. There's different kinds of pain that we go through. Now, when I think about this passage in Genesis, I think, well, I'm glad I'm not a farmer. But the principle, Adam was the only guy, and Eve were the only people alive then. And so the application to him is not just to farmers, but to all of us. This is how work is. We should not be surprised when weeds pop up and we have to repeatedly go back and kill the same weeds. Now, in your work, when you go into work tomorrow morning, you may not have weeds in your office, not green weeds, but you'll have different kinds of weeds. Problems that crop up, that pop up that maybe you didn't see coming. Or, as God describes here in Genesis 3, that these weeds keep coming up. And a sense of futility. I thought I solved this problem last week, and it's back again. I thought I solved that problem 2 weeks ago, and last week, and it's back again. Sometimes there's the sense of just frustration. And this is sort of the ministry of the thorns in our work world. Sometimes the demands of work can be overwhelming. This should not be a surprise to us. Now, why is work meant to be hard? Did it really have to happen like this after Genesis 3, after Adam and Eve sinned? Was it really important that Adam and Eve have to leave the Garden of Eden and enter into a very different world than the Garden of Eden, the world you and I live in? And the answer is yes. Work is meant to be hard. Why? If work wasn't hard, and we could talk about daughters of Eve and the other part of the curse here, we would never, ever look to God instead of making our world work through our own hands. We would just continue to believe we know what to do. We can take care of it like my dad did for 25 years of work. Gave himself to work for 25 years. He was Mr. Success, Mr. Popular. Everybody adored my dad. They loved him until my little brother left the house. And at that point, his marriage completely collapsed. And for the first time, he realized he had not built hardly anything into his marriage. And when you're at work 14 or 15 hours a day, 5 days a week, and playing golf on Saturday, how much time do you spend with your oldest son? Or his, my sister, or my little brother? Suddenly, my dad, who we adored, came to the point of realizing that he had idealized work and made it an idol, at which he had given the brunt of his waking hours to, at a terrible expense of marriage. And in the last 5 years of his life, he was scrambling to undo what he had done for 25 years. To his credit, he did well. Or you could be like my grandfather, who spent 40 years working at the post office and hated every day. But my grandfather never, ever looked to God. In the midst of his frustration and the futility and sense of failure in going to work, he never did. And when I did his funeral a number of years ago, it was one of the most difficult funerals I've ever done. There was no one in the room that wanted to say a good word about my grandfather, including his daughter, my mom, and his grandson. My dad and my grandpa made an idol out of work. My dad was successful at his idol. My grandfather was a failure at his idol. And yet both of them built their work on sand. My dad, to his credit, used what happened redemptively. God was chasing him and found him, and my dad surrendered to Jesus Christ. 3 years later, he was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and they gave him 2 years, and that's about what he did, about what he had left. My question to you this morning, and to me, is when we think about work, have we built our work on sand, foundation of sand? Whether it looks like solid sand, like my dad, or terrible sand like my grandfather? Or is work sacred? When I go in tomorrow, because God is a worker, and he's given me a mandate to work, makes it sacred, and because Jesus is my boss? Let's pray together. Father, perhaps this morning there's someone who has followed my father's example of making an idol out of work and trying to build their sense of value and importance and success on sand. And would you help them, Lord, to awaken to the sand on which they are trying to build something, and turn them redemptively to Jesus Christ. Let them see the idol for what it is, as something hideous, and turn to you. Or perhaps there's someone watching this morning that is on the other end of this spectrum. They hate going to work. And there are different reasons that we might hate work, but if there's an expectation that work ought to do something to fulfill me, we've also made an idol out of work too. It's just that our idol isn't working. But idolatry on either end of this scale is the same problem. You've told us, Lord, in the commandments not to make any graven image or an idol. That only you can be the one in our hearts that we really, really worship. That's really, really most important. So wherever we are in building our life upon sand, whatever form that takes, work or otherwise, help us to smash the idols that are alive in our hearts. And help us to look up to the cross of Jesus Christ and the wonder of what he's done for us and receives us as we are.